to members of the media. Thank you very much for coming out here. I know today is a very busy day for media members, particularly yourself, and we welcome all who have joined us on the live Facebook stream. And we hope that you are getting the stream loud and clear. Today is Valentine's Day, and it is supposed to be a day when we celebrate love and affection for all of our sisters and brothers. Let me therefore start off by wishing that we in Trinidad and Tobago embrace the spirit of love and solidarity that very many of our citizens expressed in the past few days. It was indeed heartwarming to see. And I also wish to congratulate the West Indies cricket team for their sensational test victory today and their winning of the two-test series 2-0 against Bangladesh. You brought back some hope for us all. Having said that, it is therefore regrettable but necessary for us now to take a different tack today in this statement, but it is our duty to do so. As you know, the movement for social justice has never been afraid to speak truth to power, nor have we taken the easy, populist approach to politics by appealing to some form of ethnicity, nor have we sought to simply make trite statements. In our statements, we have always tried to be objective, to explain the issues, to provide facts, both historical and current, and to engage in the crucial activity of political education. As the first Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago himself said in his address to Trinidad and Tobago on our becoming an independent nation, and I quote, "Democracy finally rests on a higher power than Parliament. It rests on an informed and cultivated and alert public opinion. The members of Parliament are only representatives of the citizens. They cannot represent apathy and indifference. They can play the part allotted to them only if they represent intelligence and public spiritedness. Nothing has so demonstrated in the past 6 years the capacity of the people of Trinidad and Tobago than their remarkable interest in the public affairs." And of course, this was Dr. Williams speaking on the 31st of August, 1962. "The development and expansion of that interest is the joint responsibility of the government, the parliament, the political parties, and relevant civic organizations." End of quote. The first ugly truth about Trinidad and Tobago is the total failure of our two traditional parties to develop and expand the interests of the people in the public affairs of the country. The sole objective of these parties, it seems, is to win the elections by any means necessary, even if this means stoking ethnic tensions. The parties have focused their statements in and out of Parliament on attacking one another, personal attacks, blaming who was in government before or who is there now for the problems that exist, and the utter failure to take any responsibility whatsoever for the state of the nation. That is their modus operandi, and it is a failure of leadership. Just look at what they have been doing and saying during the past 2 weeks, when the country has been in a critical moment after the brutal and tragic murder of Andrea Bharatt. Instead of a Prime Minister's address to the nation, or at the minimum, a major statement by the Prime Minister in the Parliament on the issue of violence, and in particular gender-based violence, and what the government is going to do about it, Dr. Rowley falls back on the old approach to politics. He holds a PNM public meeting. So instead of speaking to the country as the Prime Minister of all of Trinidad and Tobago, he speaks as the political leader of the PNM. And what he offers is simply a report on what the government has done, which is not what the citizens want to hear. On the other hand, the leader of the opposition, Mrs. Prasadh Bisesa, uses her party platform to attack and demonize the government. There is no accepting of the responsibility for how the UNC has operated in the Parliament, as was exposed on Friday last, when their stated position, and I'm quoting or paraphrasing their position, that we, the UNC, will not support any legislation unless the Procurement Amendment Act is repealed, that was the UNC's position, was hypocritically reversed without explanation when the party voted to pass the Evidence Amendment Bill. And then the UNC even attempted to politicize the public sentiments over the death of Andrea Bharatt, when Dr. Munilal called on people to shift from engaging in social protest to political protest, since the PNM can't last 5 years in government. And it got to the point where one media report said that some members of the Bharatt family had to implore the UNC supporters not to wear the party jerseys at a planned public vigil. The members of Parliament have failed this country spectacularly. That is an ugly truth. The MSJ believes that the country wants the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition to stop the cheap politicking at the expense of the safety and security of citizens. The country is fed up of promises and political games. And therefore, we think that the best thing at this point in time, or one of the things that can be done to correct the situation of the political games, is for the government and opposition to meet immediately and to agree upon a clear plan of action, the policies that are needed, the actions that must be taken, and any new and or amended laws that are necessary to be passed, and to agree as well on what resources are necessary, and that these resources must be allocated as a matter of priority to get the job done. Because the safety and security of citizens is the primary responsibility of the state. More than that, we are saying that the public must be made aware of any agreement between the government and the opposition. That we must know what the timelines are, because clear timelines must be set. And those responsible for actioning must be identified and made known to the public, so that we, the people, can hold those in positions of responsible accountable. We want no more excuses. Remember, as Dr. Williams had said on Independence Day 1962, the members of Parliament are only representatives of the citizens. The second ugly truth which we want to identify, and it's not one that is unknown, but we must speak to it, is that the criminal justice system is broken. It has failed and is continuing to fail. This has been so for a very long time. And all of the data coming out of the judiciary and various commissions of inquiry and reports and analyses and all of the statements that have been made and studies that have been done have pointed to a broken criminal justice system. It cannot be that persons are charged for a crime, brought before the court, and then it takes years for the trial to be concluded. It cannot be that people are on remand for 10 and 15 years awaiting trial. It cannot be that close to 700 persons are now waiting trial for a charge of murder. Yes, there are 700 people who are waiting trial for murder, and this is with a very low detection rate. If every crime of murder had been solved in terms of the police arresting and charging someone for every crime of murder that was committed over the last 10 or 15 years, then instead of 700 people being in jail waiting trial, there'll be 7,000 people in jail and waiting trial. That cannot be. It cannot be that persons get bail continuously when there are multiple charges and are free to do another crime and bring hurt and pain and perhaps death to citizens.
Continue.
That cannot be. Citizens are saying that we want no more excuses. We once again, as we did last week Sunday in our media conference, we once again call, and we think this is something that citizens themselves are calling for the Commissioner of Police, the Attorney General, the Director of Public Prosecutions, the Minister of National Security, the Commissioner of Prisons, the Law Association, including the Criminal Bar Association, to all meet together and to discuss exactly what must be done now. What are the laws that are being passed by Parliament but not yet proclaimed and put into effect that must be proclaimed? What are the actions that are to be taken in terms of new legislation or new administrative arrangements? How are we going to address the backlog of criminal matters in the court? All of these things, the country needs answers, no more excuses. We need to know what are the key outcomes, we need to know the timelines, we need to know who is responsible, and we need to have an end to the public arguing backwards and forwards between key office holders in the country, because those arguments backwards and forwards do nothing to generate confidence in the judicial system and in the safety and security of citizens. That's the second of the truth, the state of the criminal justice system. The third of the truth about our country is that we as citizens also fail to take responsibility. So, for example, the business community and organizations speak about the need to deal with crime. But do they, for example, ensure that there is safe transportation for their female workers to get home after working late in the night? Are they concerned about whether the single-parent mother has anyone to stay at home to take care of her girl children while she is at work? Is the business community therefore only concerned about crime when it affects the cost of doing business and their own individual safety and security, but less concerned about the welfare and well-being of their female employees? We, for example, say, and it's not something new, that if the business community wants to demonstrate that kind of concern, that those businesses should come together, including the state sector, public sector, state enterprises, and organize and implement childcare facilities so that, in particular, single-parent mothers, but generally parents, can have the comfort and security of their children being safe and secure and supervised. That will enable the parents themselves to be more productive. And also, it will mean employment for hundreds of people. And if we have businesses ensuring that transportation is provided for their employees, female employees who have to work late in the night, then that will be a tangible demonstration of their concern. So we don't just want statements of concern, we want to see all sections of society taking responsibility by engaging in particular actions that they can do, not somebody else, but they can do, because we all have to take responsibility and we all have to take action if we want to deal with this situation. The third of the truths that I want to speak to, or maybe the fourth, is that we don't recognize that those who are committing crimes of violence didn't fall from the sky. They were produced by this society. They are of us, collectively, Trinidad and Tobago. And so we must all take responsibility for this. Now, often when people speak about persons who have a problem, particularly like an addiction, they say that the first step towards resolving that problem is for the person to recognize that they do in fact have a problem. If you don't recognize that you have a problem, then you will never deal with it. And therefore, the issue of violence in our society is our problem collectively, not the problem simply of the police or the government or criminal justice system. The problem of violence is our collective responsibility, because our society has produced and generated violence. So we have to all accept that responsibility. And unless we admit to it, then we will never find any lasting solutions. And our only response will be knee-jerk. So when something happens, tragic as Ashanti Riley or an Andrea Bharatt or any of the other horrible crimes of violence to women or children, or crimes of violence that take place that are not reported widely, we get this knee-jerk response. And those knee-jerk responses tend to lead to short-term measures. So everybody knows hyped up on pepper spray and so on. Whether that will help or not, I'm not getting into that debate. But there are these immediate knee-jerk responses. People want instant solutions. Well, Trinidad and Tobago, regrettably, there are going to be no instant solutions to the problems of violence, the crisis of violence. And not only do we get these short-term measures of knee-jerk responses, but sad to say, we get, and those, I should say, those short-term knee-jerk responses are really band-aids on a deeper festering wound. But worse than that are the emotional appeals that border on vengeance, almost like an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth. So we feel a sense of vengeance, as if that resolves the problems. Those approaches and appeals for actions bordering on vengeance will not resolve the problems. And in between those various kinds of responses, we are at risk of surrendering our hard-fought gains in terms of fundamental human rights and freedoms. MSJ says we cannot throw out the baby with the bathwater. We have to recognize, for example, that the culture of violence has become deeply embedded in many. That the education system has resulted in what Ella Anders sang years ago as creating a missing generation. One person posted a very interesting thing on Facebook yesterday, and I know the person. And she said she was a teacher in a secondary school, and she was teaching 4-month students. And there were some students who were not conforming to the rules and discipline and engaging in learning as they ought to. And so she went to the principal and said, "Principal," because young, inexperienced teacher, "how do we deal with these girls and boys who are behaving badly and who don't seem to want to learn or who are not learning," and so on. And the principal's response was, "Don't worry, they will soon be gone." And she said, "Gone? Where are they going?" He said, "Well, they're in first form now. So after third form," because this was junior sec time, junior sec, senior sec time, "after third form, they will no longer be in our school, they'll be somewhere else. So you don't have to worry." Now that approach to education meant that there was no intervention at that stage or at an earlier stage to have ensured that those children, first formers children, 12, 13 years old, that those children receive the support necessary to ensure that they could become fully involved as citizens of this country, contributing to the development of the country. So they are gone. And as my friend then went on to say, well, they didn't go anywhere. They didn't go anywhere because they are out there in the society of Trinidad and Tobago. And if they were therefore seen, and if they felt and perceived themselves as being not of value, that they're gone somewhere, nobody's responsibility, then that sense of disrespect of themselves, of neglect, of a sense of hopelessness, a sense of nobody cares about them, will be translated in their behavior that they don't respect anybody else, they care for nobody else, and they have no sense, therefore, of empathy and concern for others, and therefore it will be very easy for them to engage in violent acts against other persons. So, we have an education system which, for the last 25 or 30 years, has been routinely failing 50% of the young people of this country, who don't come out of school with so-called certificates of passes and so on. We cannot continue like that. We cannot continue to have communities that are neglected and people feel disrespected because, and then say, okay, those are hotspots that don't concern us. No, we all have to take responsibility for what is happening in Trinidad and Tobago and recognize that we have to be our brothers and sisters' keeper, and that we have a collective responsibility to ensure that every person in this country can contribute in a positive way to the development of Trinidad and Tobago. The culture of violence against women and children in particular will not be stopped simply by punishment and or catching the perpetrators. But we have to stop men from thinking the way that they do. And so let me deal with that. And then secondly, by making it as difficult for the crime to be committed, because prevention is always better than cure. So let me deal with the issue of how do we stop men from being violent against women. And that therefore means that we have to deal with education from preschool all the way up, so that our boys and girls from very early on learn that they have to respect each other, that they have to have respect for life and for the value of another human being's life, that the way to deal with disputes is not by violence, but by discussion and finding solutions. There are a whole host of things that we have to do to address this culture of violence. As we said in our press conference last week, we have to have mentorship programs organized in schools. If you have, particularly because you have situations where in the community and in families, there's an absence of the father or of the male playing a positive role in the life of young people, and where a number of parents find it difficult to ensure that their children are brought up with love and support and nurturing and so much more. So we have to address the ugly truth that the culture of violence, and in particular gender-based violence, cannot simply be stopped by the passage of laws and by trying to punish those who are caught engaged in an act of violence. Because that happens after the event. We don't want to try to catch people after they have committed a murder or after they have brutalized someone. We have to try to prevent that from happening. And the prevention has to start with programs in our schools, in our communities, in our homes, and so on. And I don't want to speak, in much greater detail, but there are things that can be done. And the country needs to be involved in that discussion as to what has to be done and who has to do it, and so on. And then, of course, we've already spoken about how things can be done to make it more difficult for people to commit the crime because they know that it'll be easier to be caught. So whether it is having the transport authority in place and all PH taxis, license, and so on, license plates with microchip on them so that they could be tracked by cameras on CCTV cameras throughout the country. All of those things can be done. We need to know when those things are going to take place. We want accountability. We want to hear that these things will happen in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, because they're all agreed, and in some cases laws have been passed. It is a case of implementation. So those are the things that we want to say in addition to what we had said earlier. But I just want to repeat, there are a lot of ugly truths about Trinidad and Tobago. Some of those ugly truths too are about, and the political parties foment it, are about race and class and gender. And this country is going to have the discussions about the ugly truths with respect to race and class and gender in this country. And unless we have those conversations in a very open way, not in a way that seeks to bring people down and disparage them and attack them, but rather to ensure that people become more enlightened. People have to become more enlightened. People can't be talking about them people this and those people that and so on. That is not enlightened thinking. And so that is what is necessary. And the MSJ is committed to doing that kind of work. You know, I just want to quote what Michael Manley said, former Prime Minister of Jamaica. He said, "It is now clear that as part of the political organization's response, political education in a profound sense has got to be the heart and stop of the political process. This political education begins by a process of internal educational dialogue. It looks at the social and political history that begins with simple basic analysis of the nature of the society, the nature of the economy, the nature of its class structure." End of quote. And George Lamming, the celebrated West Indian writer and philosopher, has said, for over half a century, the leadership of both party and union, well, he wasn't speaking necessarily of some of the unions here, from territory to territory, has deliberately omitted this basic work of political education from their programs of mass organization. The omission could not have been casual, and we must assume that many a leader, then and now, recognize that such political education at mass level would inevitably alter the relations of leader to rank and file. It would have required putting an end to the uncritical adoration of the leader as great tribal chief, infallible beyond reproach, and so on. And so we want to say that the MSJ is very much going to continue in various ways the process of political education, because unless we have these discussions about the nature of our society, our history, our different class compositions and so on, our ethnic tensions, our fears, and the real causes of the problems of this country, we are going to continue, sadly, to have many more instances of women and children being killed, not to mention the fact that so many young men are being killed every day in one form of violent action or another. And therefore, what all of this says is that our first republic, established by the Republican Constitution of 1976, the first republic has failed. It has failed. And therefore, we need to move to the second republic. We now have to evolve to a better state, a better country, a better relationship of citizen to citizen, man to woman, parent to child, employer to employee. We have to evolve to a better state and a better relationship, and have better institutions, new institutions, reformed institutions that would deal with ensuring the safety and security of all citizens, and that not only safety and security in the physical sense is achieved, but safety and security of income, of livelihood, because without income and employment, there can be no good quality of life for people, And if there's no good quality of life, that also is an act of violence against the human being. So we need to have new economic arrangements that will ensure that every citizen of this country can live a decent life. And when we move towards that stage, then we can largely put the violence that we've been experiencing behind us. Thank you.
I think I've always just said, I was wondering, I was wondering where that's coming from, you know?
Giselle is taking one of our activists, Giselle Nicholas.
Aspect of, you know, towards that change that you're asking for.
Yes, I'm glad you raised the question of the spiritual dimension, because that is an important dimension of people's lives. Mm-hmm. People are multidimensional, and one dimension is spiritual. Yes, and so while that is important, I want to say that we ought not to go into believing that, and I'm choosing my words carefully here, that somehow there are some people who are evil because they turn their face against God and are without redemption. Yes? The New Testament, for those who are Christians, recognize, as Jesus did when he dealt with the sinners, be they Mary Magdalene, the prostitute, or others, he recognized the humanity in everyone. And therefore there can be redemption for most. But of course, if someone does a crime, then they also ought to pay the penalty for committing the crime. So I'm not saying that persons must not pay the penalty for committing a crime. And there's an important statement that I believe we also need to take into consideration, that God helps those who help themselves. And therefore, we have to take individual responsibility, whether you are Christian, Hindu, Muslim, a non-believer, Orisha, or whatever you may be. Everybody has to see their individual responsibility at this point in time to be their brothers and sisters' keeper. Because that philosophy is embedded in all religions. And we must go back to that bedrock of solidarity, of being our brothers and sisters' keeper, and recognizing our own sins even before we try to deal with the sins of others. So we have to recognize, so that's why I'm saying that the politicians have been throwing blame, right? Attacking each other, not recognizing that you try to take a splint out of somebody else's eye and you have a beam in your own eye. We all have to, at this moment, put ourselves in front of the mirror and take a good look at ourselves and ask ourselves, is this what we want Trinidad and Tobago? And what have we done to contribute to where it is? Because we have all contributed to where it is. Yes,
I know you mentioned the blame game that is happening between the opposition and the government. I want to know what are your thoughts on the comments from both sides on, why are you crying at a vigil when you have a place in Parliament where you can use a position you can use to make change? Is it one or the other? Is it that you find it hypocritical for a parliamentarian to support these vigils since they are in a position of power to do
support what? Sorry, support
a politician being at or supporting these vigils?
Oh, vigils. Okay, right.
Hypocritical, given that they have power to actually make change.
Okay. I think there are two dimensions of that. I think that a lot of the vigils have taken place. And let me say that has been a very positive development. In other words, and I meant to make the point and lost it somewhere. What has happened actually is that, if we go back to what Dr. Williams had said about remarkable interest in the public affairs, there has been over the last few weeks a remarkable interest in the public affairs of the country in terms of violence, and in particular gender-based violence, and in terms of the safety and security of citizens. And that interest is very important, even though it hasn't been 100% across the board. There's been a renewed interest, and that is important. And it is, I think it is necessary to ensure that those citizen activities do not then become misused or abused by party politics. Because if that happens, it will diminish the value of those activities. Yes? So, not that political people can't identify with activities, but you don't want them to become a political party show and so on, right? So I think that is important. Secondly, the members of parliament, I think, through the prime minister, leader of the opposition, need to sit down and address their own failings and agree on a, say, okay, for the next 2 months, the parliament is going to be engaged in debating and passing the following set of laws that will address concerns of citizens, because we are putting the interests of our citizens before that of the party. Remember what Dr. Williams says. He said members of parliament are only representatives of citizens, yes? And the other aspect of it is that we don't want to have members of parliament or political people chaining up their supporters to act in a way that will cause greater division at this time, because that also will be very unhealthy. So, as in everything, there are tremendous positives by way of the citizen actions, and we applaud those and support those. But those citizens' actions now have to address the kinds of issues that we have raised today. They have to begin to discuss the issues in a very serious, all-embracing way, so that we all can be elevated in our understanding of the problems and the issues, right? And that is the direction that MSJ is suggesting that the activities should go at this point in time. And in the process, place clear demands on the parliament in terms of what the people would like the parliament to do. We have offered some, and there are others that people have already put forward. Okay.
Also, I want to get your thoughts on the Prime Minister deciding not to attend the funeral after learning that the opposition leader would have been speaking at him, because he feared it would have become political, his presidency.
Well, I mean, again, I really don't want to comment on that specifically. You know, Dr. Riley decided to do what he wanted to do, and people will judge him one way or the other. I don't want to get into whether Mrs. Prasad's going was good and Dr. Rowley not going was good, and which one better than which, because that then removes people's focus from the fundamental issues. And we don't want to distract people's focus from the fundamental issues. And the media has an important role in this regard, to keep people's focus so that we get informed intervention in the public affairs. Citizens could only play their part on the basis of the role of civic organizations helping to elevate people's consciousness. And the media is a key element of civic society. So let us focus on the fundamentals and not on the bacchanal and on the personalities and so on. That doesn't help. Okay? Anything else? No, sir. Okay. Phil? Are this good? Okay. Thank you very much
Thank you
for coming. Those who came this morning, I know you're going to share it with others.